Hello, welcome to episode 97 of the On the Line Tennis Podcast. Today I'm honoured to be joined by Srihari, the co-host of Popcorn Tennis Podcast, of course, to talk about Mr. Novak Djokovic and the insane achievement he's just managed to get for himself at the French Open, of course, winning his third title there. We'll dive into the records, we'll dive into the numbers in just a second. Srihari first, how are you?
I'm good, Jack. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's been some 2 weeks at the French Open, right? You must be
Yeah,
pretty happy, of course. Yeah, you can tell us a little bit about your history with Novak, of course, and why this obviously must mean a lot to you.
as far as sport is concerned, I usually get behind the underdogs. All I was aware of for a year or two was the fact that Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal were the best players, and you had Federer, the king of grass, Nadal, the king of clay. But then I thought, okay, I'm looking for a new face, somebody else to, sort of break this duopoly. And then obviously came along Novak in Montreal 2007, pretty iconic victory of his when he beat the top three players consecutively to win his second at the time Masters 1000 title, and he edges out Federer 7-6 in the deciding set tiebreaker. And that is when I hopped on the Novak Djokovic bandwagon, if you will. It has not always been easy because we always saw someone with potential who never, for a lot of reasons, we could also see that he was not the strongest mentally. For those who know Novak since the mid to late 2000s, he had a great season in 2008. Of course, that's when he won his first slam. When the tough phase began, or when it lasted mostly, was 2009 to 10, just one big title, the peak of which was losing to Jurgen Meltzer from 2 sets to love up in the RG quarterfinal, and which you all know now was when Djokovic after which was when Djokovic started crying and he thought he was contemplating quitting tennis. He can be over dramatic sometimes, but that completely changed. 2011, and tennis history was completely rewritten from there. So that's just been the journey, and of course, it's been a roller coaster even through the whole decade, during which he, let's say, dominated men's tennis.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good way to put it, Shuhi, and it's so interesting to hear from a fan themselves. It's so interesting to hear you talk about Novak as an underdog,
Sure.
and that's why you got on the bandwagon in the first place. But it's so true. For a long time he was always third best, and he was playing third fiddle to these guys, and it all changed in 2011. And of course now, after yesterday, he is the man with the most Grand Slam titles in the history of the sport, joint with Serena Williams, of course, in the Open era. It's a record. Only man to have won every slam 3 times. So the versatility of the guy, that's completely changed as well. He wasn't a one trick pony back in the day, but I would argue his game is more versatile and diverse than it ever has been. There's a lot of
Mm.
arguments that we will get into that, but let's go down a little bit. We'll start talking about Novak's bigger picture and stuff like that, and is he the greatest of all time and stuff. We don't need to answer that, but certainly throw a little fuel on the fire and let people make their decisions. But I'd like to just talk about the tournament itself first, because
Sure.
there's a big story to talk about the last 2 weeks. Novak came into the French Open with very little clay court form under his belt. His record was pretty terrible compared to previous years. I would like, it's not flex, Shrihari, but I'd like to point out that my prediction was Novak, and it's for the same reason as Goran Ivanisevic, who I'm going to just quote here in his press conference afterwards. Basically said he didn't come into the tournament with any form. He was not worried, exactly the same as me. He doesn't count the tournaments beforehand. I do count the tournaments beforehand, but basically he wanted to say specifically, there is this software in Novak's head that he can switch when a
Yeah.
Grand Slam comes. A different sport, comparing Masters and other tournaments, he switches software. That's such a good way to put it.
Yeah.
This on board computer of Novak just completely changes when he goes into a slam. And Novak himself, of course, said as soon as he came here, he felt different in a positive way. He knows that most of the guys feel a lot of pressure coming into best of 5 matches against him, and that's exactly how he wanted them to feel.
Hmm.
That kind of mental edge that Novak has in slams. And he's a different beast. He is. And again, we'll flesh this out in the context of the actual final, where there's loads and loads of evidence of that, him being a different beast over best of 5. But Srihiri, how did you feel before the tournament? Were you worried at all? I think I know the answer to that, but tell the audience, obviously.
Yeah, it was just mixed feelings. As you know from the episode, Nick from Popcorn Tennis and I did with you. You and Nick were far more confident of Novak's chances than I was. And for me, it just grew as the tournament progressed, or as he progressed through the draw. Not the toughest until the quarterfinal. Of course, he had Davidovic Fokina, Fucovic and Davidovic Fokina, two pretty tricky customers for Novak in the past, and just in general on such conditions. Um, but then I did see the way he navigated through both of those matches. There were times in that match against Davidovic Fokina where he looked like he was absolutely gassed, or he looks like he's going to capitulate physically, and Fokina would probably snag a set, most likely his second set where he had that set point. Again, that's when there's this insane stat of for Novak in tiebreakers this tournament. He played, I believe, five tiebreakers throughout the six. All right,
Six, including the final,
six.
Srihari.
Right, including a final. Yeah, six. My bad. That is six. 17 winners, zero unforced errors. That is asinine. In most of those sets, he was the inferior player for until the tiebreaker, and then he just has this switch. Like, I mean, so similar to what Goran said, he just shuts off his ability to shut off in these clutch and massive moments where he knows he has to produce nothing short of his best tennis. That is when you just wonder, is this the same guy just 5 minutes ago was sort of tapping out, was sort of squatting and wondering if he could keep going for the set at least. It's just so demoralizing for the opponents, especially the likes of Hachinov and Ruud, who played
Mm.
on their own merit excellent tennis. When it's time for Novak to switch on in those in the latter stages of a Grand Slam, he just does it like clockwork. We all thought, okay, with the rise of Carlos Alcaraz, Holger Rune, who have sort of made him look human, made him look like, okay, he is someone who can sort of lose from a winning position, because a couple of his losses to them did seem like that. But then again, it just again goes to show that in Grand Slams it's a completely different ball game. So that is something that I was sort of reminded of. It was always at the back of my head.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said there, I can flesh that out a little bit, because particularly what you were saying about Novak just having that air about him, and obviously that eventually filled you with confidence. It's just you had to see it right and just know for certain, is he going to lock in? And of course, it was never in doubt. I would like to talk about that first set though, because so much of that set was so nervy from Novak. He didn't move great. His balance was a little off. He was certainly just struggling a little to defend to his usual crazy lofty standards, and his forehand was a little less offensive. That's kind of what happens when Novak's a little tight. He doesn't quite attack on that wing as well as he'd like. And we saw Ruud dominating with his own forehand over and over again. Extended rallies, so far in the Norwegians' favour for the first six games apiece, for the first 12 games, right? And there was one set point just before we get into the tiebreak that I'd like to point out, because Novak locked in before he got to the tiebreak. There was a moment where 30-40, Novak doesn't go for his first serve. I think he rolled it in at about 80 miles an hour. He kept it to the backhand wing of Ruud, and he started the rally going for an extended rally that he'd already been losing. He'd been losing that dynamic up until that point, right? And he locked in, he didn't miss a ball, and he played a perfect point on the set point. In the tiebreak, exactly the same thing happened. The first 3 points of the tiebreak were extended rallies, and Novak trusted himself to win those points. He basically said to Ruud, can you play better than me when I make every single ball? This is what he does in tiebreaks. You touched on it. He didn't make an unforced error. He is the tiebreak king. This is factual, I guess, in some ways, because he has won 65.9% of his tiebreaks throughout his career, which is the highest of all time. Federer second at about 65.3 or so, and the second active player is Rafa, a whole 5% points below him. I mean, 61.1% to 65.9. It is huge. It is madness. Anyway, this guy doesn't win tie breaks for no reason. He didn't miss. Ruud mentioned it. He said he's the best version of himself when he's really locked in, doesn't give you anything. He reads the game so well, it's tough to find winners against him. There was that second point, for example, Srihari, where Ruud does this amazing sequence of offensive shots. He's at the net, having played a drop shot, and he tries to go back behind Novak. Novak doesn't move. It's almost like he knew what Ruud
Yeah,
was
he
going to
just
do.
puts away the volley with ease, and and again, he raises his fist, and that's when you know, okay, he's not gonna let slip of this tiebreaker. And yeah, as you mentioned, sort of when people say this, not in a way to give him a compliment, of course, they're sort of dissing him when they call him robotic. I do want to say this in a very compliment, in a way that's complimenting him. He does turn into a machine. It's like he's programmed to play certain shots where he needs to, or like brings up certain patterns where it's almost like he knows what the weakness is, or either he plays exactly to the opponent's weakness, or he is living on the sword and he gets it right. It's one of two things. And yeah, and then even the second set, he's completely locked in. He's not missing. There was just one game where Ruud actually played well, but he still couldn't break Novak. It was the 4-2 game where Novak went 15-30. But I think other than that, he was not pushed at all in any of his service games. And third set, similar story. I personally felt Novak would win in 4 sets. I had Ruud winning the first set in my mind just because I've watched Novak in RG finals and Grand Slam finals in general, where at the beginning he's pretty nervous. If you look back at the 2021 Wimbledon final, it should have been straight sets really, because Novak was 5-2 up at a set point. Berrettini takes down the tiebreaker. And then Novak even mentioned after winning that he felt relieved after that first set was done because all of the nerves are gone, regardless of the fact that he lost it. He can now so ease into the match and play his natural game. So I don't know if the triple career slam was really playing the mind. That incredibly is being overshadowed by him claiming the Grand Slam record. So yeah, these are things that play in your head, and that's just why he's more dangerous in a best of 5 format, because he has that time play himself into the match. He can lose a set or two, but then he's warmed up and he's ready to go. And more, and if there was a pattern in his last 3 wins from 2 sets to love down, he just steamrolled the opponent in the last 3 sets. So he just, that mental edge is just so crucial, and it's so big as well. Then that's always going to play in the opponent's minds.
It's just so impressive to see him go to a different level on clay in particular. So I think Novak even mentioned, he said in his post-match press conference, the French Open is by far the hardest for him to win of all the slams. I think many would agree is what he was insinuating, but certainly, at least in his opinion, the French Open is the toughest slam to win. And certainly in this sort of post-Novak 2018 era, it should be the hardest for him to win. However, he still, I'll elaborate on that, sorry. So on all the other surfaces, he can lean on his serve, which is so much more improved. And I mean, we've seen it in these best of 5 matches. The Sinner one comes to mind last year, where he was untouchable in serve, right? And he just rattled through service games for the last 3 sets when he dropped the first 2. In the French Open, that shouldn't be possible, but somehow, A, his serve is so good he still wins 3 points off it, and B, his forehand offense nowadays is so much better that he still was able to dominate these rallies that he wouldn't have otherwise. Even in the past, he would have ground out the match probably against Ruud. But now, in his sort of post-Novak era, his forehand was amazing, and sort of arguably better than Ruud's for a lot of those last 2 sets, which is mad. Ruud's forehand is so heavy, it's repeatable, it's safe but aggressive. It's a very good shot, but Novak made it look like he was on equal terms in that department, and then better in every other one. It's honestly, it was amazing. And honestly, like, just to put it into context, Srihari, he dropped 9 service points in the first service game that he played, and then in the last 2 sets, he dropped 9 points on serve. So it was a slow start to just pure genius for the last 2 sets.
Yep, that's true. You spoke about the forehand, of course, and that this is something that was also spoken about by many people in the semi-final against Alcaraz. We have seen Novak time and again neutralize some of the best forehands in the game with his own. The way he just so many times like gets the ball back into play with interest. Not to mention the third set against Nadal a couple of years ago in the semi-final, where the forehand really came to the fore in the tiebreaker. There were those really key moments where he was exchanging with Nadal, trading with Nadal. With his own forehand, it is just so underrated. The forehand crosscourt, when he needs it to click, and in the biggest moments, just doesn't miss. He's able to find the angles. He's able to get the power he needs. All of the rallies in the second and third sets were on his own. He was the one dominating all of them.
It was just a crazy turnaround, and honestly, so commendable. We can kind of start going bigger picture, but first, I'll do a little spare a thought for Casper Ruud, who
Yep.
has now been in the joint most Grand Slam finals of all time without a title. Tony Roach, of course, 3 finals post-Open era, it is to be mentioned, because Tony Roach actually won some slams before the Open era started. So this kind of feels like Ruud's in a little bit of a league of his own here. The women's side, you have got the record held by Helena Sukova, who's actually reached 4 finals without a slam win. So it's not the most of all time, but on the men's side, he does stand alone at 3 if you don't count Tony Roach. He does feel, though, that he's making progress. And I mean, to me as well, this felt like progress. It didn't feel the same as the previous 2 slam finals, where he was maybe a little outplayed. Certainly the Alcaraz when he came close, but I thought this was the highest level he brought to a slam final. And he does feel like he's starting to plant the seeds of respect, he said, in his opponent's eyes, which has always been the aim for Ruud, I guess. I think he's always felt like he's been a little bit undervalued. He's this kind of player who's not particularly, feared in the locker room. I think he needs to start building that kind of air. I think the only thing he said, he was a bit regretful about the second set kind of slipping by him so quickly. But I thought he was fine in the other 2 sets. I really think he was. And yeah, he was against a different league today. Srihari, how did you rate the Ruud performance?
Yeah, that's a pretty commendable scoreline, I should say, for the level Novak brought to the final. Maybe you would have some regrets about the first set, because not only was he up a break 4-1, he threw in a couple of loose games himself and had love 30 at 4-5. So those were pretty big chances, because from there on it was just a completely different match. I think he did start well or he did sort of play himself into the match, especially against Rafa. 3-1 in the second set, had game point, and did not win a game for the rest of the match, lost the next 11. Couple of set points, 2 or 3 set points in the third set of the US Open final to go 2 sets to 1 up. You just never know. There's one thing I should say. I am a huge fan of Casper, but then maybe the fact that, or the nice guy aura, whatever that he carries, does not really help him. It's also sometimes his own fanboyish nature, if you want to call it that, because last year he obviously went on that exhibition tour with Nadal, and he was asked, which is one match that you wish you would have the result of flipped in, and that is when he mentioned the 2012 Australian Open final instead of the US Open final that he himself lost to Alcaraz. So I mean, usually players would pick one of their own matches which they wish had a different outcome, the opposite outcome, if you will. So yeah, I guess maybe that's something you might want to work with. If anything, I think the game is there. Also, the backhand can improve. It's still shaky. It's still a shot that he doesn't fully trust. He plays it too safe. Not the same case with, say, Berrettini or Tsitsipas, for example, where that's an easy shot that can be exploited by the best of players. I do think he can get there, and I definitely think we'll see him again in Turin and
Yeah.
have a good result again.
Yeah, I think that's a very good way to put it. I agree with pretty much everything you say there. Let's bring it back to Novak, though, anyway. Just run for a few records before we close up. I'll give you them all, Suhiri, and then you can give me your thoughts on everything. So, I'll pre-quote this by saying I'm not saying he is the GOAT. I'm not saying he's not the GOAT. Just you guys decide for yourself. I don't care. I'm just here to give you the facts. Basically, greatest front runner of all time, question mark. That's now 99 Grand Slam matches in a row where he's gone on to win after winning the first set, dating back to Stan Wawrinka in 2016. Of course, the big record, most slams of all time now on the men's side. 23 of the 70 Grand Slams he's played, he has won. So that's basically 1 out of every 3 that he has played. Most weeks are number 1, of course. That's 388. Speaks for itself on the men's side. Aging like wine, though, this is where it gets very, very interesting, because I think that he's kind of rewriting the script on longevity. Yes, there are players in our sport that have kind of paved the way. I would say Federer and Serena for sure had kind of started that trend of playing late into your 30s and still playing well. Novak, of course, said he was inspired in Federer's Wimbledon 2019 speech when he beat him there. But I'll just give you a few of the stats. Even from 2011 to the middle of 2016, when Novak won 11 slams, he won 11 out of 22 that he played, 1 in every 2. That's a worse rate than his post-2018 rate. 11 out of 17 since Wimbledon 2018. That is 3 out of every 5 he's played, basically. He has played 13 major finals and won 11 since he turned 30. That is 15-3 since 2015. It is just mind blowing stuff. And honestly, it is so hard to not respect the guy. I don't know how people see Novak Djokovic and think this guy doesn't deserve an iota of respect. It's just inhuman. And he has, honestly, it's groundbreaking, I think is the word I'm looking for. Srihari. It's groundbreaking.
Yeah, it's unreal. It all started from, if you were to go back to that 2014 Wimbledon final. He's up 5-2 in the fourth as a match point. Federer sort of steals the set 4 or 5 games in a row. And that's when you think, okay, does he have the mental strength to put that behind him and come back? And he did. Federer had his chances, by the way. 4 all. I remember there was 15-30 nets, or was it 15 all? He nets a smash, and that probably turned it around because momentum was still in his favor. His record in Grand Slam finals at that point was 6-7. Since then, of course, I think he won the in next two and lost one to Stan. I guess 17 and yeah, 17-4. The math is mathing. Since that moment, it is unreal with the complete mental shift. We did see traces of him, his mental strength. Most importantly, the 2012 Australian Open, back to back marathon matches. Andy Murray in the semis, Rafael Nadal in the final. 5 hours and 6 hours respectively. He gets through both of them. Two of the best players at the time. One of them, being one of the greatest players ever. For a long time, that felt like an anomaly. And whether is he going to replicate this or not? But since then, like, it's unreal numbers. 21 of his last 22 semifinals won, if I'm not mistaken, or 20 of 21. Either one of those. And he's just lost one five-setter in the last 5.5 years, being the one with the
Jesus.
Dominic team. Yeah. Again, when the going gets tough, this is the guy you want to back. No matter what the surface is. I won't say no matter who the opposition is, always. Maybe, I have my reservations for, say, for example, Nadal on clay or Nadal at RG, but this is a guy who's proven time and again you can bet your life on him winning, if you can go as far as to say that. If he wins the U.S. Open, that would be 2 career slams in the second half of his career alone. Because that's the only slam he's not won multiple times since turning 30, which is just unreal. You just think about them, it's mind-boggling. And like you mentioned, how can you have all of this in mind and still sort of be in denial of his greatness, or ponder whether or not you still see articles, you still see column pieces saying, oh, she's still not on the level of Federer and Nadal. I don't understand. Maybe, yeah, if you were to ask me, yeah, he's a level ahead, if you can go ahead and say that. But yeah, like you mentioned, these are just numbers you would never have thought of, and you can't even think of even now. So it's just, yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I mean, there's a. I think you might even be referencing the same article here. There's a odd Guardian opinion piece where the arguments really poorly strung together, and you're allowed to think Novak's not the greatest of all time. It's fine, but trying to deny the numbers.
Yeah,
Novak's got the numbers. Novak has got the numbers in every single department, and that's fine if you don't think that's what merits you the greatest of all time. Whatever. This is why I was quite reluctant to even go into the GOAT race, because I feel like it can get a little bit petty. I really don't care. That's what I'm trying to say. But at the end of the day, the numbers are undeniable, and they deserve so much respect. And I've got my favorite player. It's not Novak Djokovic, but I respect the hell out of this guy. It is crazy what he's done to our sport, and he deserves every bit of praise he gets for it. It is just wild. And anybody who's not looking at those numbers over the last few years and just having their mind blown is not looking hard enough. Like,
that's true.
this guy is doing
There's
crazy
another
stuff.
stat I forgot to mention. So since losing to Nadal at the RG quarterfinal last year, he's won a big title, or the biggest title each of the surfaces has to offer. If you were to leave out the US Open because he didn't play, Wimbledon, he's won it. Australian Open, he's won it. As you mentioned, let's go as far as counting indoor hardcourt as a separate surface. He's won that too. He's won the ATP finals. He's won Roland Garros. There are players who thrive to achieve that during a lifetime or during their entire career. This guy's done it in a span of less than a year. That's insane. Like, it's just the more if we have had a word counter for this episode, insane and mind-boggling, would just
Yeah,
top the list.
yeah,
So yeah, like we can churn out the records, the numbers that this guy has, and just marvel at it, right? And then the best part is it's still so much to go. Like, he's thinking ahead. The same court in a year from now, or a bit more than a year from now, again, that's when he could, you can say, complete tennis by winning the Olympic gold. The one title missing in his cabinet. He's won everything else multiple times. It's just that one. The only caveat about the Olympics is that it's a best of three event again. But you saw Djokovic loses that edge, that obvious edge that we are aware of. Just bringing out one last stat as we are sort of coming to a close in this episode. I think he's lost since 2018 just four completed matches in best of five events. Completed matches. The two that he lost, one in a retirement, the other one obviously the infamous disqualification. So maybe that is one advantage he doesn't have. So he leaves him vulnerable to the likes of Holger Rune, Carlos Alcaraz, Sinner, all of these young guys who can play well on the surface. That being said, that's the one thing that's probably left for him, and he just completes the sport. He's won everything that's there to be won, and by everything I mean each of the nine Masters events, the ATP finals, each of the slams, the Olympics. What else? Davis Cup he's won.
Srihari has given you the stats. He's given you all the information you need to say greatest of all time. Up to yourself to decide. Phenomenal, groundbreaking, all undeniable. The guy is
Yeah.
insane. He's amazing. Anyway, though, we'll close up shop there. This is a Novak Djokovic heavy episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Srihari, thanks very much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed the time here.
Yeah, pleasure is all mine. I definitely enjoy my time here, and thanks once again for having me on. And look forward to chatting with you again, which could be pretty soon.
Absolutely no worries. You can check Srihari out. I'll just get your Twitter up, of course. It is at the moment Srihari Ravi _12, right? As you're
Yep.
trying to get your new account back on Twitter. Please go
Yes.
give him a follow there. Popcorn Tennis Podcast, of course, go check that out. If you're on YouTube, give us a like, give us a subscribe. Thank you very much for listening to the Online Tennis Podcast. We'll catch you very soon on the next episode. Thanks, Srihari.
Thank you, Jack. See you soon.